Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
My name is Kimberly, the topic is Fallout New Vegas, and the cigarette is American Spirit. In the events of Fallout New Vegas, the Courier can select one of 4 potential outcomes to determine the fate of the Mojave Wasteland. These outcomes can be selected regardless of your character's gender, race, or any other physical traits which distinguish them. However, one of the potential factions you can side with has a pretty intense reaction to you if you select a female character.
Expect Caesar to send a woman to do this job. Oh well, at least you're here now. I was starting to get lonely out here by myself.
What do you want from me, woman? I'm in charge of the arena, not the cooking pots.
We're property. If you're too young or too old, the men usually leave you alone. Usually. You ought to be careful yourself. I overheard some of the legionaries talking about trying you out.
Women are physically and intellectually inferior to men. Their role is to bear children and ensure the survival of our species. Not to say that all women are equally incapable. I trust Caesar will find a worthy use for you.
Even with this, you can still side with them, helping them win the war and thus linking them to your player character for the events which will take place after the game. This brings up the question, what would happen to a female courier if she were to align herself with Caesar's Legion? In this video, I'll be discussing several potential outcomes for your character and injecting my own thoughts about the Legion and its relationship to Rome in the process. With that being said, how Roman is the Legion in the first place? This is a question that has always bothered me. Caesar likes to talk about Rome and how it's a template for the Legion, yet there are a lot of aspects about it which aren't particularly Roman at a glance. For example, the structure of its society. Rome was a very metropolitan and urban culture, having many of the largest cities in the world at the time. The Legion, on the other hand, is a marauding horde that goes from one conquest to the next. For sure, Caesar says that they have cities, but these urban centers seem to be more of an exception than a rule, with him openly stating that Las Vegas will be the first real city in his empire. Maybe you can compare him to Caesar in Gaul, since he himself does that when calling the Colorado his Rubicon. But at least Caesar in Gaul had a republic to attach himself to. Caesar in the Wasteland doesn't have a society back home. There is no legion without him and his army. I guess the best way to frame it is if Caesar were to die in Gaul, the republic would live on. If Caesar were to die on the Colorado, the legion would fall. Along with this, there is also a complete lack of a civilian populace or civil bureaucracy within the Legion. As far as I can tell, there are 3 classes of individuals within Caesar's empire. There is the Legion, there are parties not in the Legion but who fall under its protection, such as traitors, and there are slaves. In Rome, the concept of the citizen was important. The Romans were a republic after all, and the concept of citizenship continued well into the empire. Yet the Legion, as far as I can tell, lacks citizenship, or any attachment to a non-military life beyond serving in the army. The members of the Legion are born slaves and turned into slave soldiers who are supplied by slaves in turn. It feels like there are no freemen within the Legion, and it is simply various castes of indentured labor operating under a single man, which would honestly go against Rome, which had an army of freemen with their concept of citizenship attached to service. It honestly seems like Caesar just likes the aesthetic of Rome. He takes their words, he parodies their religion, and he makes a mockery of their philosophies, which makes sense in a way, after all.
It means a nationalist, imperialist, totalitarian, homogenous culture that obliterates the identity of every group it conquers. Long-term stability at all costs. The individual has no value beyond his utility to the state, whether as an instrument of war or production.
The Legion is a self-proclaimed fascist organization, and like many fascists, they have a selective memory of the ancient world. Caesar likes the parts of Rome which he can exploit, and he likes the symbols that add to his cult of personality. Any evidence or facts that go against this cult are simply ignored. After all, who can possibly correct them? So the question of how the Courier would be treated in a hypothetical Legion victory is heavily dependent on which parts of Rome Caesar calls upon when transitioning his Legion from a glorified raider horde and into a settled people around his new capital. His personal outlook on Roman history will play heavily into whether the courier becomes a wife, citizen, soldier, god, or slave. Anyways, with that prefaced, let's discuss option 1. How smart is Caesar? That seems like a pretty strange question. Everyone thinks that he's really smart and uses big words and talks about grand philosophical things in a world that has long since lost its philosophers. Who else but a smart person could discuss the thesis and antithesis of everything in a world where these concepts are no longer taught? He took a band of tribals and turned it into an army that would go on to conquer lands in at least 4 different American states, and now has the ability to go toe-to-toe with some of the only functional bodies left in the world. That isn't something that an idiot could do. But he also seems like a man who tries to shell-shock you into thinking that he's an intellectual, using big words to disguise that he sometimes doesn't actually know what he's talking about.
That's not how fucking dialectics works, you stupid cuck! I didn't study Hegel, plus continental philosophy in general, at Harvard for 7 fucking years for some...
And a smart person doesn't take half of his population and effectively unperson them, starving his new empire of half of its potential soldiers, citizens, and taxpayers. So, knowing how smart Caesar is in conjunction with the lessons that he learned from Rome is going to be very important for this discussion. It's no secret what the Legion does to women in its camps. After all, in the game, every party you encounter within the Legion, regardless of rank or personal freedom, finds it remarkable that you maintain a degree of autonomy in this society as a woman. There is a good chance that after the events of the narrative, your character could join the ranks of the other women within the Legion, being indentured and traded off. In fact, even in the post-game slideshow, we see the very same fate befall an ally of the Legion, with the women of the Great Khans meeting a similar fate. And sexual violence upon women was a staple of the classic Roman kingdom. Part of their founding mythos includes an event where the neighboring Sabine and Latin peoples were lured in by the fledgling city-state for a festival which the Romans used as a cover to abduct the tribe's women and force them into Roman marriages. Though while this is a possible outcome, I don't find it to be the only one that could be encountered within the Legion as the courier. In fact, as a woman, the courier is still honored with the minting of a coin, showing a degree of respect that Caesar has bestowed upon only a select few before her. Plus, during the battle, the legionnaires seem to find a new respect for you, treating you as a fellow warrior and not only as a woman. In my opinion, this is most clearly seen in the attitude of Legate Lanius towards you. In the other endings, he has no problem threatening you with sexual violence.
The West's treatment of bitches such as you is their weakness. But by my honor, I shall face you alone as you request. Woman of the West, you will learn your place. In my tent, and again when you beg for release on the edge of my blade.
But in the Legion ending, he sees you as a messenger that bears the blessing of Mars, who he is actively making sacrifices to. To him, you almost seem to have this semi-divine stature as a blessing from his god. Through your duty to the Legion, you are redeemed and allowed to transcend the limitations of your birth in this society. So with that in mind, I find it unlikely that you would be cast in chains to become another member of the Legion's breeding stock in the event that they win. This is especially true if Caesar really knows his Roman history. He is a king who drapes himself in the pageantry of Rome, and the last king that Rome had before becoming a republic lost his throne because of an extremely unpopular rape. The Republic was born when Sextus Tarquinius, a prince of Rome, raped a noblewoman by the name of Lucretia. The suicide which followed resulted in a leading Roman citizen named Lucius Junius Brutus heading a revolt against the monarchy in order to end its tyrannical rule. If Caesar knows his history, then he knows how dangerous a rape such as this can really be to his foundation, and he'll be especially keen on the fact that the kingdom ended because of a man named Brutus, something that anyone who claims to be Caesar should be extremely aware of. And there was no other woman as popular in the Legion as the courier herself. Before I begin with this option, I just want to state that I could see this as a possible outcome for both the female and male courier, not being unique to any gender available in the game. There once was a Roman emperor by the name of Justinian, gifted with a dream of reclaiming Rome for the empire. In his quest for this goal, he had his brightest general lead an expedition out west. This general went by the name of Belisarius. Belisarius' reputation grew as he conquered North Africa and then Italy, expelling the Germanic tribes from the region and granting the jewel of the empire back to his emperor. You can see a parallel start to take shape with this narrative. Caesar wishes for his empire to have its Rome, and you are his Belisarius, helping to make that happen, arguably more key to this than any other commanding officer within the legion. It was you who conscripted the boomers, you who killed House and destroyed his army, you who removed the Brotherhood from the equation, and you who will cast the NCR's commanding officer out of the city in Caesar's final triumphant victory. And just as your legend is growing, so did Belisarius's close to 2,000 years prior. There were whispers in court that he would attempt to break away from Justinian and start his own Roman Empire out west. These whispers reached the ears of Justinian, who decided to do what was necessary to curb these rumors and deter his general's potential ambitions, whether the rumors were founded or not. He exiled Belisarius from his court and provided him with a comfy retirement out on the fringes of the imperial capital. Maybe this could be the fate of the courier if they were to side with the legion, being pushed to the fringes of Vegas or maybe even the edges of the empire altogether. Sure, they would be given a comfortable retirement, but they would be kept far away from Caesar as to deny them any chance of coming to claim the legion for themselves. This retirement would also keep the courier in his deck of cards if Caesar was in need of them later. Just like Belisarius was called back into service to protect the capital from the Bulgars after retirement, maybe the courier could be called upon when the next crisis befell the legion, as would likely happen if Caesar were to continue his campaigns out west. Of course, another possible version of this could be Caesar seeing the courier as a threat and silently removing them from the equation altogether. Maybe this would be short-sighted, but the courier is a popular figure to the point of being put on coinage, an honor that had previously been granted to Joshua Graham, and that honor did little to protect him from Caesar's wrath or desire to curb the rise of a pretender. Regardless, I see this as another possibility, and one that could unfold regardless of gender.
It's not Legion. The Legion I know. But they change, even in small ways as they march west, with every tribe they break. But yes, last I heard, you needed a weapon between your legs to carry one for Caesar.
During the Republic, Rome was confronted by an enemy at its gates, a power to rival them which was centered upon a wealthy capital in North Africa. Over the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, Rome would fight 3 wars with Carthage, besting their rival repeatedly and asserting their dominance over the western Mediterranean for centuries to come. Over the course of these wars, Rome would change how it fought, adopting shipbuilding tactics from their rival, and fighting a plucky defensive action in the very heart of Italia itself. It would see the Republic lose 20% of its male population in a single battle, but still persevere. And much like the Rome of old, the Legion of New Vegas is an adaptable organism. We see it adopting heavy artillery and brokering deals for advanced energy weapons. We see it use espionage and terror tactics to great effect against a foe like none it had fought before. The Battle of Hoover Dam is not only Caesar's personal Rubicon, but it's very much the Legion's equivalent of the Punic Wars. During the battle, I found it curious how the legionaries changed around the female courier. The men who talked down to her in camp now addressed her like an equal in the heat of battle, staying professional and letting her know how she can help in this situation. And even the feared legate talks to her with a far more level tone than he would in an NCR ending. The Legion has met its Carthage and has bested it with the courier's help. Rome is now secured and its treasures along with it, yet the NCR is still a powerful enemy and future conflict is likely. The Legion, like Rome, will have to evolve if it wishes to move west or if the NCR decides to return east in force. Caesar himself talks about how the city will allow his tribe to settle, and part of that will involve creating a civilian populace, a group of citizens, but his legion requires manpower, and just like the Romans had to adapt after losing 20% of their male populace, so will the legion in order to accommodate and replace its losses. I don't see the Legion as changing overnight and openly welcoming women into its ranks, but I could see a future where auxiliary roles or remote garrisons could start to include them in order to free up fighting-aged men for the front line of its various conflicts. Desperate times call for desperate measures, after all, and I don't see Caesar as the kind of man who would fail to adapt if the future of his empire was on the line. Or maybe he would, staying stubborn and steadfast in his beliefs. Yet again, this is all contingent on how smart the man is and what specific lessons he is taking from the Romans.
The fundamental premise is to envision history as a sequence of dialectical conflicts. Each dialectic begins with a proposition, a thesis, which inherently contains or creates its opposite, an antithesis. Thesis and antithesis. The conflict is inevitable, but the resolution of the conflict yields something new, a synthesis, eliminating the flaws in each, leaving behind common elements and ideas.
Yet Caesar himself talks about how the conflict between the NCR and Legion will cause the two of them to come together and to change into something new. It isn't entirely impossible to imagine a future where the NCR causes the Legion to liberalize as a response to trying to best it, including adapting its own methods of warfare. Just like the Legion has caused the NCR to grow increasingly dictatorial in its approach to groups in the Mojave, straying from the ethos established by Tandy. This war, in its conquest, will change the character of the Legion, and that could have an effect upon its populace, including a female courier. And in a future like that, maybe there is a way for the courier to stay in the fight. In Rome, marriage was required in order for a child to be seen as a legitimate heir. It's unknown if the Legion believes in a similar philosophy. Some supporting evidence is the end slide about the cons, which talks about how the women were sold as wives. This, along with the fact that legitimate births can be seen across countless societies, especially those that descend from Rome, could indicate that there is something sacred about legitimate births within the organization. And as far as we know, neither Caesar nor any of his commanding officers have a wife. We don't see any of them around the camp, with the closest possibility to a wife being the slave girl tied up in Lanius's tent. Though considering the circumstances, it's far more likely that she's next on the chopping block if the legate's sacrifices to Mars continue not to pay off. So, with none of the Legion's command structure having a means to legitimately continue their bloodlines, I could see the courier as an instrumental trophy to either be attached to Caesar himself via marriage, or awarded to a favored general to help continue their lineage. There has never been a woman of higher station in the Legion's history, so to be wed to the courier would likely be treated as quite the honor. Also, as the Legion transitions from a roving horde to a settled people, the need for administrators and bureaucrats will follow. Lands will need to be managed, and if conquest slows, taxes will need to be raised. During the imperial period of Rome, women within the royal house held tremendous informal power, acting as an extension of their husbands for various court and bureaucratic duties. They could influence picks for a governmental post, apply soft power over emperors, and had a hand in all avenues of state authority. The Courier has already proven herself to be an adept asset, and Caesar would be a fool not to utilize that resource to its fullest. The Courier's talents would be wasted as a broodmare, or simply as the body fit to carry on the royal bloodline. It seems extremely feasible that they could be granted power as the wife of Caesar or the wife of Caesar's chosen successor, acting as one of the bureaucratic arms that this new fledgling state needs. This would also make sense in terms of coinage. During the Empire, it wasn't uncommon for imperial coinage to include other members of the royal family, using money as a means of elevating them and attaching them to the imperial cult. This could possibly be Caesar's motive for including the courier on the new coins, a means of portraying her in a light that associates her with his own imperial grandeur before formally unifying her with his cult of personality. And if the courier were to outlive her husband, that also opens up new opportunities. There are plenty of instances where powerful women in Rome often outshine their husbands or sons, periods where they ruled the empire through the informal soft power they held. Female heads of the home, known as maîtres familiers, were remarkably influential individuals, having not only married and raised emperors, but also being seen as motherly figures to the empire's top aristocrats and even foreign royals who were vassals of Rome. In Fallout, it almost seems like Tandy fills this role as well, with Caesar speaking highly of her. 3 examples from Roman history are especially prevalent to me when theorizing this outcome. During the original empire, there was Agrippina, who controlled her son Nero via a selection of advisors for him. This included her using her influence over the emperor to pressure him into appointing Afrianus Brurus as his praetorian prefect. This essentially made it so the head of her son's security owed his position to her, and his loyalty was hers to command. And in the Eastern Empire, several women would rise through the ranks and hold tremendous power. Theodora would hold the empire together during the plague that ravaged Constantinople and temporarily removed her husband, Justinian, from court life. And Irene of Athens would rule the empire independent of a husband, father, or son for long periods of her reign. Do I see the empires falling into the hands of the Courier in this scenario? I mean, it's possible, though it should be noted that these powerful women were few and far between, and were very rarely looked upon favorably. They were seen as acting unwomanly and were treated poorly by the early historical narratives which discuss their lives. That being said, there would be historical credence to back up this possibility. On top of that, there is also the reputation of Tandy, as mentioned, proving that strong women can rule post-apocalyptic states in this universe. And as strange and impossible as this chain of events might seem, with our limited information, it must have seemed even stranger and likelier when it actually happened in our real historical context. Strange things happen, and these things seem impossible until they actually occur. And there are few figures as good at dealing with unexpected outcomes as the Courier herself. Okay, before I delve down this path, I want to discuss that this is a theory that I view as being least likely and having no or little supporting evidence behind it. The concept feels a little fanfiction-y, and I just want to lay these cards on the table before I continue ahead. Think of this as the Wild Wasteland ending for the Legion. The cult of Mars is a central tenet of the Legion, seeing Caesar as the semi-divine being who is directly descendant from the god of war, kinda like the Legion version of Hercules. This cult is so ingrained in the Legion that Legate Lanius conducts human sacrifices in the name of appeasing this god and trying to curry his favor. And as we know, the Rome of old had many gods, a pantheon of them in fact, a pantheon which grew through conquest. For example, after the conquest of the Sabines, there was the inclusion of gods like Pales, Saturn, and Minerva. And from the Celts, there was Erechira, just to name a few. As Rome grew, so did its pantheon. And Las Vegas is the Legion's most important conquest, reclaiming the city of Rome and granting Caesar his imperial capital, a capital that will need to be reformed and rebuilt, turning it into the so-called City of Marble that it once was in the ancient world. I am sure a part of this rebuilding will involve temples, and with these temples there will be room for a new pantheon. Then you have the Courier, a figure of remarkable character who played a key role in the Legion's victory, a figure who doesn't fit neatly into how the Legion defines a woman. Maybe like the cult of Mars, there could be room for a cult centered around the Courier. If Caesar is the son of Mars, then would it really be so insane to think that the Courier could be the daughter of Minerva, the Roman version of Athena? Ares and Athena were siblings, after all, the two gods of war in Greece's pantheon, and as they transitioned into Mars and Minerva under Rome, they held on to these warlike traits. What would show the Legion's favor more in the eyes of the plebs than having the children of two gods of war within its ranks, the favored champion of both man's fighting spirit and a general's tactical skill? This would also elevate the Courier and make her example impossible to follow for any slave women who might get funny ideas. Like I said, this is the most fan fiction idea that I have. While Rome did have a history of making leaders gods, like Caesar and Augustus, there is no proof that a woman was ever bestowed with a similar honor. But also, you sat through a video about this, so I can assume that you have at least some passing interest in fandom, fan theories, and maybe even fan fiction. It's a meme in the community that the female Courier can side with the Legion, with popular Reddit threads discussing the subject. I guess I was just kind of hoping to use this video to talk about Rome and also offer some alternative outcomes to the fate of a female courier in a Caesar's Legion ending of the game. So yeah, that's the video. I don't really know what I plan to do with this channel, but stick around if you'd like. Bye!